Okay, we talked in the last video about how technology's essence is Nietzschean, right? But the essence of Nietzsche is really Plato. And that the origin of Platonism as thinking comes out of a technological comportment of Dasein. Moreover, you want to hear this as well, that Heidegger is saying here, he's not just doing a thought experiment. He's not just saying, yeah, the essence of technology is Nietzsche, the essence of Nietzsche is Plato. He's saying that the essence and origin of all thought, the way we think about thinking. When we think about thinking, when we practice metacognition, remember, human beings as Dasein are the only beings that can think about thinking or practice metacognition. When we think and reflect upon the thinking that we're doing, right, we can't get out of Platonism. We think in Platonic terms. Just think of the way we think about truth as the correspondence of the mind to reality, or the mind to essence, comes right out of, Heidegger thinks, Plato's idea of the cave, or the sun analogy, where the eye and seeing the object illuminated by the light is to the mind, to the forms, or being, as when we think about what's the being of something, we think about it in terms of essence or quiddity. This means that the way we think is so Platonic, and when we think about thinking, we can't twist free of that. Heidegger's trying to think about thinking in a way where we don't think platonically about thinking. Okay. And so Heidegger says, origin of Nietzsche, Plato. Origin of Plato. Where does Plato come from? Where does Platonism come from? Well, it comes out of a technological comportment of Dasein, fine. But really, Heidegger ends up saying at the end of the technology essay that this way of thinking about being is actually rooted in what Heidegger calls a sending of being. Or we could say a showing of being. That is, being is showing itself in this way. The onus is on being. Being wants to be seen in this manner. It's sort of anthropomorphizing being, but I think Heidegger does it, anthropomorphizes this being, because I think it's the best way to talk about it. Think of it this way. Being gives itself to be thought platonically and ultimately Nietzscheanly, okay? The question then is, what's being? What is being? Well, remember we talked about being in the class, being with a Y for Heidegger, which is the ontological difference, or the condition for the possibility that opens up thinking about a being and its essence, or a being and its whatness. It's the nothing, it's the space between things, right? So when I think about what the being of this cup is, what the essence of this cup is, I transcend the cup to its essence, but the condition for the possibility of transcending this cup to its essence is that a space of nothing, a nothing that illuminates, a dark illumination, opens up between this thing and its essence and allows me to go metataphysica beyond this. So being with the Y is the condition for the possibility of metaphysics qua metataphysica. Okay, but what is being? Being is simply that nothing annihilating, that nothing illuminating things in their beingness, that thing that allows the space to open up, or that space itself that opens up that allows the beings to be illuminated in their meaning, okay? And that is the same as, and Heidegger calls this tautological thinking, that process of illumination which allows for things to be illuminated in their meaning is the same as the process of truth, which is the process of revealing and concealing, disclosure and concealment. Okay, so being is a kind of, being is reality showing itself but also hiding itself. It's objective perspectivalism, remember, okay? Interestingly, Heidegger thinks in the history of Western thinking, that being conceals itself is precisely what's concealed. So, but this is interesting because being is actually showing itself in such a way that it's concealing the fact that it conceals itself. So the origin of Western thinking for Heidegger is rooted in a showing of being, because being is the thing that shows itself but also hides itself. It's perspectival. So you look at being and you see aspects of it, but other aspects hide. But this particular showing of being, or this particular sending of being that is constitutive of Western thinking, from Plato to Nietzsche, is a showing of being that hides the fact that it's a showing of being. It's a showing of being that conceals its own concealment. And therefore, this is one way, this is another term that Heidegger uses for nihilism, the concealing of concealment. And what's concealing of concealment? It's reductionism. It's something showing itself as if it's the, or the only, or just something. So, what are human beings? They're just their brains. That's reductionistic. That's concealing concealment. Okay. But back to being. Being is this process that shows itself but also hides itself, and it even shows itself, one manner of showing itself, Western thinking, has showed itself as if it's not showing itself, as if you're getting the whole thing. This is what Jacques Derrida calls the metaphysics of presence, that everything is present, right? So being is, one think of being this way. It's this revealing and concealing. It's the process of truth. Sometimes Heidegger calls it the event. Being is a kind of text that is open to interpretation, or rather, maybe that's not the right way to put it. It's a kind of text that self-interprets, okay? Now, it doesn't self-interpret by itself. It needs Dasein to help it interpret itself. But being is this thing that sends various interpretations of itself. Being is self-interpreting, okay? Reality interprets itself or gives it over to a certain interpretation. Now, the interpretation of Western thinking is, right? And you want to think of this too. Heidegger's thinking about what he's into hermeneutics, right? He's into the polyvalency and multiple meanings of things. And so he's thinking about what does being have to be such that it's able to be interpreted, right? But being is showing itself as if it's not interpretable, as if it only has one meaning or a singular meaning. So being is actually showing itself in a reductionistic manner. It's interpreting itself in a way that makes us think we're interpreting it. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, if you ask somebody now, or I was talking about in class that the metaphysics of reductionism, which reduces the meaning of being to one meaning, namely controllability, or we think that truth is only scientific truth, we move the realm of values and meaning into the subjective, right? So we think truth is only what we can control, and meaning and value are precisely what we impose on the world. That's precisely why meaning or Western metaphysics is actually Nietzschean, right? Because Nietzsche thought we imposed or stamped becoming with the character of being in the will to power, in the supreme active will to power, he says in the text Will to Power. So being is showing itself from Plato to Nietzsche, and this is the history of being, the Seinsgeschichtliche Denken, the history of the thinking of being. Being is showing itself as if it's not showing itself, and it makes us think we're interpreting. Being is interpreting itself such that it makes us think we're interpreting it. This is the irony here. So being shows itself as if it's not showing itself, and as if we're imposing meaning on it. But being has to first show itself in that manner in order for us to understand the world as if meaning is subjective, not objective. Okay? So see if you can wrap your head around that. Being is this thing that interprets itself. But the interpretation of being in Western metaphysics is such that being shows itself as if it's not showing itself. Moreover, it shows itself as if it's not the kind of thing that interprets itself, but it's the human being that interprets itself. So it's showing itself to human beings as if it's not showing itself. Ergo, human beings are the origin and source of meaning. Now, Heidegger doesn't think this. He thinks reality is saturated with meaning. But the modern paradigm of being, or of modern metaphysics, science, and technology is such that being is not this polyvalent thing. It's showing itself as if it's not that. It is that, of course. And we see this is why Heidegger uses art to sort of twist free of metaphysics, to overcome metaphysics. He thinks in art you automatically get a sense that being is so rich in meaning beyond simply mastery and interpretation.